Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're tuning in. This is kind of a mid-season, not quite mid-season, roundup episode of Backyard Buckets, brought to you by Backyard Sports. I got Bentley with me. Ryan's a little under the weather today, so it's kind of a two-man crew. How you doing, bud?
I'm good, dude. I'm real good. Feeling rejuvenated after a break of NBA ball last night after coming off the cup,
Yeah,
Excited to get into the Christmas stretch here.
yeah, for sure.
A lot of stuff happening.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right into it, man. Let's talk about NBA Cup because after a really, really rough start, injuries were a big problem. The Bucks have kind of figured it out. Maybe they're 8-2 in their last 10. I think they're like 13 of 16 or something like that over the last few weeks. Giannis looks like is he the best player in the world again? Suddenly, he is carrying the weight there in Milwaukee. They are getting healthy. Lillard looks like he might be serviceable this year after looking like he'd lost kind of a couple of steps last year. What do you make of the NBA Cup first? Let's talk about that. Does it still capture your intrigue? I know we talked last year that we kind of think this thing is going to live and evolve and the NBA is going to make some changes, but pretty much the same format this year. Jerseys, court, that sort of stuff. They're trying to do different things to accentuate what the cup is. But what do you think of the NBA Cup, and what do you think of the result?
So personally, just because folks like us are junkies, I enjoy it. I think it adds a level of intrigue. It's fun to see the guys kind of care about the games that are happening in November, December, right? That's a thing that with an 82 game season you don't get every single night, game in and game out.
Yeah.
But it's very apparent when you watch these games, especially the ones that are happening in Vegas, that these guys care about taking home hardware, right? And you get the guys down the bench. Somebody asked me this. They were like, can they incentivize? We were talking about All-Star Weekend and how it's changed, and we'll talk about that on another show. But they were like, can they financially incentivize these guys to care? And I was like, no, not at all in terms of All-Star Weekend, because the guys who go to All-Star Weekend are making $45, $50 million a year.
What's an extra mil to them,
Right. But if you give everybody on the winning roster of this NBA Cup $1 million, you're getting guys 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 that really, really care a lot, right? Because they're doubling their salary in a night, basically.
Yep.
So you're getting buy-in basically from the full roster. And if you have guys at the top that make a shitload of money, they want to help the guys at the bottom, usually if they're a close-knit team. I know Giannis loves the guys on that roster. So it's really cool to see players buy in all the way through. Now, the unfortunate thing is that they're going up against college bowl season. They're going up against college basketball. They're going up against NFL late-season games. Like, I know the NFL nights don't coincide, but regardless, right, it's still a sport that's happening. It's taking eyeballs off the NBA. So I still think they have some shifting to do in terms of the timeline of the NBA Cup. I still think it's detrimental to have it this early in the season when you're trying to put this level of importance on it. If they were to shift it to where the finals, like the championship in Vegas, happens the week between Conference Championship weekend and Super Bowl weekend in the NFL, I think that would probably be better. But, like you said, we kind of believe it's going to live, it's going to morph, it's going to shift. I trust in Adam Silver, in his ability to kind of read the room and make adjustments as he seems to be, or as he sees fit to do so.
Yeah, for sure. I'm still with you 100%. I think the schedule might be the most maybe detrimental is the right word in terms of getting eyeballs on the NBA Cup and getting fans to care about the NBA Cup more. I know this was an effort to get more meaningful games in the season, but you're absolutely right? You're competing against things that it's crunch time in the NFL. It's bowl season, as you mentioned. Hockey's kicking off at the same time. You're going to lose a small section of fans that are going to want to watch hockey, which happens to run kind of on the same sort of schedule like the NBA. I think I agree with you. If we look to maybe push it to February, if we look to push it, even if we go a little past that, right, and find a standalone weekend or something like that after the Super Bowl, if it's, the second week in February or the third week in February, it's on a Saturday or a Sunday instead of a Monday night or a Tuesday night, that sort of thing. I think these are all things that, one, I assume that the NBA is considering. But if they're not, I think those are things that need to be brought up in that room as they're trying to ideate through ways to make the NBA Cup more intriguing. But we did end up with two teams that are very, very hot, and I want to talk Bucks a little bit because we kind of buried them early. You and I have buried them because of their coach. Mentioning coaches, Darvin Ham is 14-0 in the NBA Cup. For those that don't remember, they went undefeated when he was with the Lakers last year in the NBA Cup, and the Bucks went undefeated all the way through the title this year. And he's an assistant coach with the Milwaukee Bucks. So if you're an NBA franchise and you want to win one of these things, I guess you just need to get Darvin Ham on the staff. So just bring him in. But let's talk Bucks though. This is a team that, like I said, we kind of buried them, kind of left them for dead. Like they're too old, they're slow, they've lost steps here. The injury bug plagues them there, but they are, like I said, 8 out of their last 10, and they are really, really hot right now. They're up to the 5th seed in the East, and if they continue on this trajectory, they're going to start to challenge the teams ahead of them, the Magic, the Knicks, etc., for one of those top 3 or 4 spots, hosting a playoff series in the first round. And then you don't know, right? If once you get in the playoffs, you kind of don't know. When you've got one of the guys that can be considered one of the best players in the world in Giannis, all bets are off if you get to a game 7 in a series, right? So how do you feel about the Bucks on December 19th as opposed to how we felt about them on like November 19th?
I feel demonstrably better. And I think the biggest difference between what we've seen, and not even like inside of this singular basketball season, but the last few seasons for Giannis, was that he would settle a lot for 3-point shots, or he would even like just try to include them at all in his offensive repertoire, which has never been his strong suit, right? Like Giannis is a downhill guy, get to the rim, yam it in your face. And early in the season this year, you mentioned the injuries kind of piling up, coming out of the gates for the Bucks. Well, they got all their guys back. All their guys are healthy now, and they're shooting incredibly well, right? Yeah. As a team, they're shooting 37% from the 3. Now, it's not that there are teams that are shooting better, but like if you're in the top 5 percentile, top 10 percentile of the NBA in terms of 3-point shooting, because of because of the way the game is played today, you're going to be a very good offensive team, right? Giannis has taken his 3-point attempts down to 0.7 per game. That's a man who's shooting almost 21 field goal attempts per game, shooting less than 1 3-point attempt per game. It's still, like you said, being the best player in the world at this exact moment, right? I think he's averaging 32.7 points a game, which is crazy. Like, to be able to play at the speed and the pace he plays with the aggression he plays with, taking no 3-pointers and still scoring almost 33 points a game. Yeah. But when you got guys like Taurean Prince shooting over 50%, Chris Middleton shooting 25, that's not something you expect from him, but like picking up the slack is Bobby Portis, Gary Trent Jr., Dame is shooting pretty good, high 30s for him. Like, these are all winning factors. And then you pair that with the defense that we know that Giannis can anchor. I understand that Dame on the outside he's not the defender you want on the point of attack. But when you have a force like Giannis and Brook Lopez can still run around a little bit and play defense, like they just have kind of got it figured out, right? Like we heard the stories all offseason this year about how Dame didn't have an offseason plan last year because he didn't want to get hurt working out because he knew he was going to get traded. Well, this year he has the contract and he's locked into the roster. So we kind of are seeing the fruits of that. Like, sure, he's a little older. It took him some time to get rolling, but like this team is playing incredibly well. They're 8-2 in their last 10, and they moved up to, I believe, the 4 seed. Yeah, they're the current 4 seed in the East, after kind of digging themselves into a hole early in the season. But we're seeing the Giannis that we know is in there. He's playing at that MVP level once again, and it's an encouraging sign if you're a Bucks fan.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go to the other team that was in the finals. That's the Oklahoma City Thunder, and it seems like every time I look at the standings, like their last 10 doesn't change, and it's like 9-1.
Yeah,
they're 9-1 in their last 10. As mentioned, the Bucks beat them in the finals here in the NBA Cup. I gotta ask, like, is it the Thunder and everybody else this year? Because they seem to really feel like they might be an actual juggernaut. That roster is young and athletic, with a guy in Shea Gilgeous-Alexander who has the leadership, it seems, in that locker room to really be a rising tide for that team. And you pair that with how much talent, how much athleticism, and what they've got in the young bucks that they can just rotate in and out, in and out. It's like an inexhaustible resource that they've got there. They feel like they might be an actual juggernaut this year. Is it OKC and kind of everybody else in the NBA this year?
I don't think so. I expect this team to play for a championship, to win the West. But as we saw in that Bucks game the other night, like if they're not hitting, then their offense kind of reverts to, well, Shea, we need you to score 35. Obviously, Chet is not there, so that presents some limitations on the offensive side of the court in terms of spacing. With Hartenstein, he just is not he doesn't spread the floor the way that Chet does, right? He also doesn't. He's a very good defender, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't move around on the defensive end the way that Chet does. He's not necessarily the looming shot blocking presence that Holmgren presents. But as good as they are, and as in your terms, juggernauts, as much as that is true, I still think that they're missing like that guy. You know what I mean? Like the guy, it's Shea. Don't get me wrong. Like tight spot, got to have a bucket. It's Shea. But if the team is not hitting, they shot like 22%, I think it was, or 32% maybe from the field on Tuesday night against the Bucks. And if that's happening, like, and if Shea is just not being able to get his, like Jalen Williams is really good. I don't know if he's there yet, and he might be there by the end of the season, right? He's still super young. He's still developing his game, and he may be there during this finals run that they're going to go on. And he might be the guy that you can give the rock to and say, hey, we need you to get a bucket. Because we've seen him do it in the past in moments, right? We talked about it last year in their playoff run. I wouldn't necessarily call Jalen Williams, for as good as he is, like a secondary creator for the offense. He might be a secondary scorer for that offense, but they and the style of offense that they play kind of lends itself to everyone being a creator, right? Because of the movement and Shea opening up so many things. But I don't know, they just kind of lack that second guy. And I'm really hoping for their sake, if you're an Oklahoma City fan, that Jalen Williams can become that person that they can lean on late in games down the stretch. Again, we've seen him do it in spurts, so there is that belief inside of me that he can do that for them. But if they go on a cold stretch like this, to answer your question, it's not just going to be the Thunder and everyone else, because in playoff games, teams get hot and teams get cold, right? We see it happen all the time.
Things tighten up in the playoffs too.
Exactly, 100%. Boston was hot for the entire playoffs last year, right? Yeah. They steamrolled Dallas, who was scoring 1 million points a game, and it's like Boston just got super hot and Dallas got super cold, and that can happen for stretches of time, and it happened to Oklahoma City in Vegas on Tuesday night.
Yeah. So
I'm hesitant to say it's Oklahoma City and everyone else when I just watched them lose because they couldn't throw the ball into the fucking ocean in a quote championship game, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's gonna lead us into our final topic of the night. I don't want to spoil anything, but we're gonna talk a little bit about ratings and kind of how style of play might impact that, and maybe some other factors as well. But you talked about it, right? It's a lot of how hot are you from the 3-point line in a given game, and if they're not shooting that well, any team, right? It's not just Oklahoma City. This isn't an indictment on them. This is kind of today's NBA. We just watched the other night 70, I believe it was 77 missed threes or something fucking silly in a game, and then the following night we get like 49 made threes, and it's like the record for most in a game. So it's like that's the ebbs and flows, right? When you play a game that from a metrics perspective, it fits what modern NBA GMs and roster builders are calling the winning formula, but you can go through those ebbs where you shoot 22% or 32% or whatever it is from the field or from the 3-point line, and suddenly you're not the team that's going to dominate, the way you kind of have for large stretches of the season, as OKC has. So, all right, let's shift gears to a little more kind of dire news, I guess, for those of us that have appreciated what LeBron has done to kind of bolster and take the lead for the league over the last 20 plus years. Father Time seems to have finally caught up with him, and I don't think we've seen anybody battle Father Time and kind of fight him off for as long and as well as LeBron has. But he just stepped away the other day, missed a couple of games, needed some treatment, and we're starting to see him kind of slow down. We talked about this a few weeks ago in terms of like what his output was for the Lakers and how sustainable we thought that could be over the course of an 82 game season. And it wasn't very long that it took for that to kind of rear its head, right? He had to miss some time, and ankles can be one of those like fluky things, right? You step on a foot, you land awkwardly, you get bumped the wrong way while you're running, that sort of thing. You can roll an ankle, and that's kind of the luck of the draw. But for 20 years, LeBron has kind of avoided a lot of those kind of fluky things. And it seems like as he's maybe slowed down a little bit as he's getting older, we're starting to see some of these wear and tear type things, these fluky injuries kind of creep in for him. Do you believe that Father Time has caught up with him? We'll start there.
Sure, absolutely. We talked on an episode earlier this year about how he just doesn't move the same, specifically on the defensive side of the court, right? He still has all of the basketball knowledge. He is a savant of the game. I'll die on that hill. I'm not sure that anyone's pushing back, but that's just something I firmly believe in, right? He's one of the most knowledgeable basketball players we've ever seen on the court.
You may not die on that hill. You might just have a lot of company.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Mount Everest die.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Father Time comes for everyone. He does not lose. He's undefeated. He's like Ray Baker, dude. The son beats everyone. You can't take him one-on-one. It's just not a thing you can do. LeBron has pushed back and back and back and pushed, and he's won for decades at this point, literally 2 decades. But there's no shame in admitting that, hey, like, you're just not the player you were 5 years ago, right? Yeah. You've made $1 billion. You've won 4 championships, multiple MVPs. Like, you are the second greatest basketball player of all time. That's fantastic, but not that LeBron is not admitting that. He holds himself to the standard, rightfully so, of being the greatest in the game, and it's just that's not the case anymore. And we've said it before. I blame the front office for trying to build this roster in a way that accentuates LeBron James as like the man and pushes him to the forefront when he simply is not that guy anymore. He can be the second best player on the team, and they tried to do that with Anthony Davis, but they probably picked the wrong like co-star to be that person.
Yeah. You got a 40-year-old superstar who you're pairing with a guy who just can't stay on the court. And credit to Anthony Davis. He seems to be playing through some things, but it's like every night he's got some sort of designation. Last year was kind of similar. He ended up playing a career high since New Orleans last year. Mm-hmm. But it like for fantasy owners, it's like the pucker factor is real every single night when the Lakers have a game because you just don't know. And I imagine that's amplified even more as like if you're JJ Redick or if you're his teammates or ownership and that whole organization. That has to be amplified, obviously, because those games mean a lot more to them than fantasy owners. But like the impact is there, right? Is Anthony Davis going to play tonight? Can we build around him? And as you said, I think they brought Anthony Davis in, but still built this roster to take advantage of what LeBron can do, as opposed to building the roster around Anthony Davis and taking advantage of what he can do and allowing LeBron to just be like an incredible complementary piece. And I don't know that like LeBron probably wouldn't be super accepting of something like that because as you said, like he's a prideful man. He's a competitor. He's an apex predator. And you don't want to admit you're losing the battle with Father Time. You never want to admit that. Nobody ever, and we see guys stick around. It's not just the NBA. It's across all sports. We see guys stick around too long and you watch them kind of, fall to the point of like, God, it's like a walking carcass on the field, right? They just can't move. They can't do the things that they used to be able to do. So with all that said, there's been a little bit of smoke around whether or not the Lakers would make LeBron available and who would be a good fit. There's been some rumors that keep flying around social media. They're fake news rumors, at least from what I can gather, that Golden State is like making the move to trade for LeBron. I don't know if it's them. I don't know if it's somebody else, but I'm going to ask you, if you're the GM of a perceived contender, we'll say Golden State, right? They are a team in the West that's gotten off to a good start, and you could probably make a case that maybe they want to take advantage of like this last hurrah for Steph and Draymond while they can. Would you trade the assets to go get LeBron James if you were a perceived contender this season?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, it depends on what compensation you have to send back. But if you are a team that believes you are contending for an NBA championship, I don't see why you wouldn't make every effort to bring him in, right? Now, obviously, he has the no trade clause, so it's going to be up to him ultimately. But if you're Golden State, why would you not try to pair Steph and LeBron, and I would assume Draymond Green together for one last shot at a championship? Those are three guys that are within the twilight of their career. You're going to sell 1 million fucking tickets. Every game will be a sellout. You're going to sell incredible amounts of merch. Like it would be such a financial incentive to bring LeBron in. And then you pair it with the basketball acumen that you're getting out there on the court. And forever in Steph's career, I think that people who know basketball have said that Steph is an off-ball guard. Like, that's what he is, right? He's not a true point guard. He can play the point guard position incredibly well, but his best position is playing off the ball. And if you bring LeBron in, we've said it on this show, LeBron is at this point in his career a point forward, and he could just run the entire offense.
Yeah.
Now, their defense would suffer, I would imagine. But if you score 130 points a night, that might not matter.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. I think I'm with you. I like the caveat you said, like, what do I have to give up? I don't think every contender could just say, like, LeBron will fit with our roster, right? I think there's some exceptions that you could look at and say, like, is it going to be a detriment? I shouldn't say detriment, right? Because it's still LeBron James, but is it going to detract from what we're building here? Like, I look at, we just talked about OKC, right? I don't know if LeBron is the complementary piece that I want to go with Shea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I want to lighten my bench necessarily for a guy that's that heliocentric. But I do think that, you should at least consider it. If you can put it together with the right package, I think every contender should consider it, because it is still LeBron James. And as you mentioned, you can do a lot of things with a guy that is a 6'8" point forward who has the basketball acumen that you mentioned. He's still a savant. He's still, one of the most, if not the most, basketball intelligent players that at least we've seen, right, in our lifetime. So I agree with you. I think that, if there's an opportunity, it should at least be explored for sure. All right, moving on to another kind of injury case here. We've got the Cavs sitting atop the East, and they're going to be without Isaac Okoro for, it looks like, about 2 weeks. It is a fairly deep roster that Cleveland can run in terms of their rotation, but Okoro gives them a lot of things that can potentially hurt a team, right? He's very athletic. He's a wing guy. He can do a lot of things. Max Strus is kind of expected to come back soon.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to make up enough? Are the Cavs going to be okay without Ike Okoro?
So on the offensive side of the floor, I definitely think they'll be fine with Max Strus coming in. It's 23 minutes a game they have to replace. That's not nothing.
Right.
When you look at the role that he plays, yeah, go Cavs. I agree. Isaac Okoro, every single night that he suits up, he typically will be guarding the best ball handler on the other side of, like, on the other team, right? And that's going to be the biggest detractor.
Yep.
This team is successful because they have the two defensive studs in the front court with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, while simultaneously having Isaac Okoro out there to run around and in the biggest moments guard the best ball handler on the other side, right?
Yep.
Matchup dependent, but that's typically how that goes within their rotation.
Yep.
That's something that Max Strus
can't do.
it's like, yeah, he can run around with them, but he's not the defender that Okoro is. He's not as long, he's not as quick. Like it's not his strength, right? So I think the team will be fine. Like they're not going to plummet, you know what I'm saying? But there may be a couple of games in there that like you really, really notice the absence of Okoro as opposed to having Max Strus out there, you know? So panic meter very low for the Cavs on this one. But it's an injury where you will notice it if you're someone who watches Cavs games regularly.
Yeah.
Like I do on League Pass. Because they don't get primetime games for some reason.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's a shoulder too, right? Like that's partially what worries me is like, some of those things can linger as a guy who's had surgery on both of my shoulders. Some of those things can linger as a guy who, you mentioned it. You're not asking him to do a ton on the offensive end, but on the defensive end, you get very physical with that joint, right? You can body people up. You're trying to take away passing lanes, that sort of thing, and that can be something that lingers. And we'll see. If it's only 2 weeks, it's only 2 weeks, and if he's 100% when he gets back. But yeah, it could be something that's a little bit long term. But we'll see. I do think the Cavs will be fine. One of the big things is like the East at the top has gotten pretty competitive right now. With how hot the Bucks are, the Knicks have turned it around. Orlando's kept afloat without Paolo. They're going to get him back. Franz, in terms of being able to, get some studs back and get healthy. So the East is pretty competitive at the top. You want to have that one seed if you can make it work. So yeah, Cleveland's gonna want to button down when it comes to the next couple of weeks. Staying in the East, Jimmy Butler. There's been a lot of trade rumors about him. This isn't a new thing. This has been going on for a while, and whether or not he's ever going to be traded. Yeah, that's whether he's 100% or not for sure. We had a little bit of a back and forth this week with Jimmy Butler and his agent, and new NBA Apex insider since the retirement of Woj and heading to Syracuse. Get well, Woj. Just looking back at that, but Shams reports that there's a couple of teams that are in, and the agent jumps back and says like, this is patently false. You're misinformed, whatever. And Shams claps back like, no, I'm not. Like, he's the insider, and usually the way this plays out is the agent claps back because they're trying to drive the best destination for their player. They're trying to whether it's a sign and trade, those sorts of things. Jimmy's not in that situation, but like sometimes that's what they're trying to drive is leverage to get the best situation for their player, get them out of Dodge and get them where they can be successful or make the most money. We usually see that happens, but then in the end, the insider is pretty correct when it comes to where the player ends up and those sorts of things. So one, it's funny to watch these back and forth, but two, I'm curious your thoughts. Like, what's going on with Jimmy Butler? Do you expect him to be traded? And do you want to take a stab at where you think he ends up at?
Sure. I just got to look up real fast Jimmy Butler's age. He's 35.
Yeah.
Just turned 35. Okay.
Yeah.
I knew he was in his mid-30s. We talked about Father Time.
Yeah.
They went to the finals too. They go twice in 3 years.
Bubble, and then 2 years later.
Against Denver, yeah. And Eastern Conference Finals, I think the year after that, they lost to Boston. Yep. So this is a guy who has a ton of miles on him. He played for Tibbs early in his career, so we know what kind of harm that does to a human's body.
Yeah.
And all that being said,
the chat.
Yeah, for real, honest. All that being said, like Jimmy Butler is a guy. He's on the very short list of players you want on your roster come playoff time. Still to this day, I believe that. He's a guy that comes to media day with his hair done in funny styles. He had the Fallout Boy. He had the long twists. I guess they weren't dreads, but he. And then this year, coming into a contract season where he's up for an extension, so he's only expiring. He came clean cut, ready to go. and has really underperformed this season, in my opinion. He just, I figured in going into a contract season, he would want to say, hey, like, I can still be the face of your franchise, Miami. Like, pay me my money, and then we'll figure it out and let everyone else work around me. By the way, I think everybody on that Miami Heat roster, aside from him, is 27 or younger. I'm pretty sure I read that right the other day.
I think you're right.
So they have an incredibly young roster, and then they have this aging superstar or star, whatever you want to call him, kind of trying to drag this team along come playoff time. They might not even make the playoffs at this rate. I would assume that they will, but like it's
only
it's
because the East is terrible.
Exactly, right. So if I'm Miami, I think it makes the most sense to try to move on from Jimmy Butler, acquire assets, and finally get into this rebuild that like we thought was going to happen prior to Jimmy Butler coming there. Miami is always an attractive destination, right? We know that they're always in. They like to go big game hunting in free agency. We talked about it last year or the year before, whenever the Giannis and Dame and all that stuff happened, right? I guess it was the year before. We're like, man, what if it doesn't work with Dame? Like, is he going to want to go to Miami? Is Miami in the Karl Anthony Towns lottery? There was the Kevin Durant decision when he was leaving Golden State. Like, oh boy, like all this stuff. So Miami's an organization that will be fine. Like Pat Riley will figure something out, right? They're not going to be awful for a long time, you know? So it would make the most sense to me if they try to move on from Jimmy Butler, if they recognize the potential or the ceiling of this actual roster they have currently constructed is not championship level. Try to get back as much stuff as you can and then just rebuild. Like it happens with teams, right? This is the natural rotation of the earth. This is how it happens in the NBA. That being said, I don't know who would want Jimmy Butler because he's going to want a contract. So if you give up assets for him, like real assets, which the price is going to be steep, then you then have to pay 35-year-old Jimmy Butler.
That's the thing, right? Like I just, where is the leverage for Jimmy Butler to force a sign and trade, right? I understand like he's in a contract year, but I just don't look at like guys that have been in those situations in the past are 29, 30, 31 years old, not 35 and not clearly diminished, right? Like Jimmy Butler is not the Jimmy Butler, not Jimmy Buckets, not Jimmy Playoff. Like this, it's not the same. And I understand maybe his desire to want that, but maybe it's one of those things, right? In terms of accepting reality, it's not easy for these guys to do it. I would be just looking for a place where I could go and compete for a championship this year. And we'll see what age 36, 7, 8, 9 have in store for us. Because I just don't think there's a team out there that's going to pay him to compete, right? Any team that's making a trade right now is not making a trade to sell Jimmy Butler jerseys. It's not like LeBron where you're going to get an instant, everybody in the world's going to buy the new, if it's the Warriors that trade for LeBron, everybody in the world, China's going to buy 1 billion of them, right? Like it's just not going to happen with Jimmy Butler. So I just don't know that I look at it and say like, there's a team out there, even if it's not a competitor, that's going to be like, yeah, we need to bring in Jimmy because we're going to fill seats the rest of the season or anything like that. I just don't see it the same way. And if I were Jimmy, I think right now I'd be looking for somewhere I could be the third or fourth wheel and just be a guy that's going to be able to give you a little bit on both ends. I've
heard Denver tossed around. I think that makes probably the most sense of like the actual contenders. Obviously Houston, I wish Brian was here to talk about that one, but like Houston is another team. I don't think if you're Houston, you do that, right? You have so many young guys that you probably need to see.
Who would you be willing to give up, you know?
Exactly. Like, I don't even think that they know at this point who they'd be willing to part ways with.
Right.
Golden State, I feel like they're just going to be a trade rumors all year long, trying to figure out what to do around Steph. Because specifically, right, they play 12 guys basically every night. And
they do.
We've talked about it. Steve Kerr not really knowing. I'm sure he knows what his rotation, like his ideal rotation would be, right? But he's having to play all these dudes to tinker with things to figure that aspect of it out. Like actually,
they're not winning games anymore either.
Yeah, well, yeah. But like Jimmy Butler, he takes takes 1.5 3-pointers a game, which in today's NBA, and we'll talk about the style of play coming up, right?
Yep.
But that's just not a guy who, at least in the regular season, is going to win you a ton of games. He's having less than 20, only taking 1.5 threes a game. Like he's a dog. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But he's lost probably half a step on the defensive end. And I think I agree with you that he should probably look to be like the third wheel on a championship team, unless he can get to a team with Jokic or Giannis on it like that, because then they are so far above your number ones that like he could be the number two and it would probably be fine.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's going to play out in Miami. I really don't. If I said it before, I'll say it again. I think that they probably should look to move on from him because he's going to be expensive and that roster is just not like I know they overperform in the playoffs because they have probably the best coach in the NBA, but like, I don't know. I just don't see it from them this year. The top of the East, the top of the East is better than it has been. And the West is obviously a juggernaut.
Yeah.
There's got to be a fit for him out there somewhere. I just like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like that you brought up Spo. I was going to mention that. You mentioned, are they going to have to tear it down and rebuild? Two things that they have going for them are the two things that you mentioned, right? Miami is a destination city, so it's going to be easy if you get to a point where you've got a say you make your Victor Wembanyama pick, right? Whoever that is in the next 3-4 years, you've got Miami as a destination city to bring in other stars to play alongside a guy like that. And you've got Eric Spoelstra, who I think we all agree is one of, if not the best coach in the NBA currently. So you've got a couple of assets in your favor if you're going to tear it down and you're going to rebuild there in Miami. And you've got Pat Riley, who has built twice now, has built teams that go to the NBA Finals, won a few championships, and the other one made it a couple of times, unexpectedly made it a couple of times with a bunch of undrafted guys. You've got a culture. So I think you've got a few things going in your favor if you're going to tear it down and rebuild.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about our final subject, because this is one that I think is starting to make the rounds with the talking heads too, because it's a pretty stark realization that the NBA is having right now. Ratings are down, and it's not insignificant, right? It's a fairly big difference in terms of the ratings being down. And on top of all that, the NBA is in the middle of like negotiating a bunch of like options for TV deals. It feels like they're trying to create like the platter that the NFL has, with Amazon being in the streaming mix, YouTube TV now having Sunday Ticket, and ESPN having rights to an ESPN Plus game, and Black Friday now being a thing where Amazon has exclusivity on that in addition to Thursday. And the NFL has been able to kind of capture Christmas the last couple of years. Like, the NBA is struggling in terms of like maintaining their market share with the holidays that they typically dominate, on top of the fact they're negotiating TV deals right now and ratings are down. So I want to kind of talk through, I've got a few thoughts. I'm sure you've got a few thoughts in terms of like things that might be impacting it and why ratings are down. I want to float one out there and get your thoughts on it, because we've alluded to it a little bit, style of play. I think the NBA has run into a situation that baseball ran into, and it's a watchability factor. And from a metrics standpoint, the same thing happened in baseball that happened in basketball, especially when Steph hit the league and people started to realize, like, if I shoot 35 or 40% from three, that's better than shooting 60% from two, because you get more points, right? You get more points based on the volume of the shots you take. From a metrics and from a winning standpoint, it all makes sense. And baseball did the same thing, where we've gotten to the point where baseball, for those of you that don't watch baseball, it's basically an all or nothing game now. And it's about the long ball and it's about strikeouts. And that's really all baseball cares about from a winning standpoint, because you win by scoring runs and you win by keeping guys off the bases. And that's what strikeouts do. And the long ball is how you score runs in that vacuum, right? In that bubble, that atmosphere, that ecosystem that baseball has created. That's how you score runs. That's how you keep runs off the board. But it makes the game very choppy. And as a lifelong baseball fan, and I hate that I've seen the game kind of go this way, it is hard to watch at times. I think the pitch clock is a change that baseball has made that's helped. They're talking about some other things, but it's a watchability thing that I think the NBA is at a crossroads right now, where the game of basketball at the professional level is starting to get some of those same problems, because I mentioned earlier we had a game within the last 2 weeks where they missed 70, it was like 77 or whatever the number was. It was a ridiculous number of missed threes. I didn't watch that game, but I could only imagine the people that watching that game were just like taken aback, and it had to be a very difficult game to watch. And then the very next night or 2 nights later, we had a game where they set the record for most combined made threes. So like you go from an exciting kind of crescendo, and then you're in the valley, right? Of like, we missed 70 some threes. Do you agree that the game of basketball at the professional level has lost some of that watchability factor that maybe made the game kind of grow to where it got to about, I would say about 5 years ago, the NBA kind of hit its peak in terms of like, it was the fastest growing sport in the North American professional sports at the time. Have we gotten to a point where the game's starting to get a little bit unwatchable, or do you disagree? Do you still think there's a real watchability factor for the casual fan?
Yeah, so this was probably the biggest point I had in terms of why the ratings are down, right? I do, to answer your question first off, I do agree that the watchability factor of the NBA games are down. I think there's many factors to that. Basketball has never been the perfect viewing sport for a TV audience. I think we can all agree far and away football is a much more desirable watch on the television, right? It's 12 seconds, you break, 12 seconds, you break, 12 seconds, you break, right? Basketball, in theory, at least the basketball I grew up watching, was 7 minutes of semi-uninterrupted action, timeout, 7 more minutes of uninterrupted action, right? Of like actual action. We go back to 2017, James Harden's in Houston, and the heliocentric. We can go back even further, right, if we really want to, but like James Harden revolutionized basketball in the way that he became a heliocentric type of player. Yeah, exactly. He became the system, right? And that was like kind of the early Splash Bros. The three-pointer hadn't really taken over basketball yet. But I remember people talking about it at the time, like true basketball fans being like, man, this is awful. Like, I'm just watching James Harden dribble between his legs 15 times, wait for 7 seconds on the shot clock, and then he makes his move, you know? It was the modern version of the four corners offense that Dean Smith ran at North Carolina.
Yeah.
And James Harden would either get to the rim, make a bucket, get to the rim, get fouled, take a step back three, or get into the paint and hit a guy that was just standing around for 18 seconds prior to that action occurring, right?
Yep.
So that was one iteration that kind of that was the first chink in the armor, if you will, for the NBA. And then Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, they had already won a championship at that point, but like then it really took over. Kevin Durant went there. They started shooting incredible amounts of threes, right? Like record-setting amounts of threes. I think if you look at the top 10 three-pointers made by team, they have like 6 of them. And those were all like not the past 6 years. Those were the first 6 years of the last 10 data set, right?
Yeah.
Because every single year for the last 4 years, we've like set the new record. I think Boston is going to smash that record this season. I think they're shooting, I think over 50% of their field goals attempted are three-pointers currently in Boston. So we see the explosion of the three-pointer. And you said it, it's the most efficient shot in basketball, right? Like you take a three-pointer, if you're shooting 35% or better, it is the most efficient shot you can take on a basketball court. Like it's worth the most points. And the more of those you shoot, the higher chance they are to go in, and the more points you will score. That's how you win a basketball game.
Yep.
So the NBA today, I just said more than 50% of the shots taken from the Boston Celtics are three-pointers. Well, guess what? Everybody is trying to emulate what Boston is doing because Boston just won the fucking NBA championship, right? Everybody's trying to become Boston outside of maybe Washington. I don't know what they're doing.
Oh, Washington.
But everybody wants to be Boston, right?
Yep.
Case in point, Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards, who the NBA last season was pushing as like the face of the league. Oh, he's Michael Jordan's kid, like all this, and that, right? He's the most exciting player, and I think I still believe this. He's the most exciting player going downhill in a half court setting. Like, you don't know what the fuck he's going to do when he goes to the rim. Like, he might dunk on two people. He might switch hands. Like, there's no telling what he could do. He is shooting almost 11 3-pointers per game. Like, why? I don't understand. Like, you're an incredibly gifted athlete. Go to the rim. Like, play basketball. Sound like an old man here. Play basketball the way I watched it growing up. Like, use your God-given athletic ability and your basketball skill to beat the defender and score the ball. Like, Melo, widely regarded as one of the greatest scorers of all time in the sport of basketball, didn't really become a three-point merchant until he was well into his 30s, right? Like, he was king of the mid-range.
Back to the basket, mid-range jumper.
DeMar DeRozan, who has only been outscored, I believe, by Kevin Durant, LeBron, and Steph Curry during his career in the NBA, king of the mid-range, right? Like that. Like that's how that works. You know, he's an incredibly gifted basketball player who scores wherever he can get his points from, right? So the watchability of the league, I think, is very down because the level of competition is not down. The level of basketball is down. We're playing a dumbed down version of basketball. And it's really, really unfortunate, right? The ratings are down 28% from where they were at this exact point last season. Like, that's a
huge number.
Now, there's other contributing factors, right? And I'll hit on them quickly. But like, I think the biggest reason is that basketball is vanilla at this point. Every single team tries to do the exact same thing because it's the most efficient way. It's perfect relation to baseball, like you said, strikeouts and home runs. In basketball, you're shooting a three or you're making a dunk. Like, that's it.
Yep.
And every team does that. So like, it's just names on a jersey at this point, right? You have your guys who are really good at shooting threes, and you have your guys who are just not that good at shooting threes. It doesn't matter who they are.
So that brings me to a point I wanted to get your thoughts on it. So I feel like the 3-point shot and the way it's kind of taken over the league, you just alluded to it. So I think I know where you're going to go with this, but I do want to get your thoughts on this because I got thinking about this. I heard Dan Patrick was talking about it earlier. Do you think the 3-point shot has kind of opened the league up to guys who wouldn't normally make it to this level in what we would consider like traditional basketball, right? Like the basketball we grew up with, get off my lawn. I'm the old curmudgeon here for a moment. Like traditional basketball. I think that there's a good percentage of guys that are in the league right now that are super athletic. They're very talented in certain ways, but I don't think that those ways are necessarily like what we would call your foundational basketball talent. It's a lot of guys that like can shoot the three and they're super athletic on the defensive end. So they're just jumping around and kind of contesting shots and whatnot. Do you agree with that? Do you not agree with that? Do you think I'm way off base with that?
I don't think you're necessarily way off base. I equate it to, so I go like micro, macro, right? Micro, talk about the superstars in the NBA, true superstars, Magic, Michael, Bird, those guys, they're going to play in any era. Like, you put them in any, if Magic Johnson was born in 1994, he'd be one of the 4 best basketball players in the world because he was able to do all the crazy. He'd be Luka Doncic, right? Like, he just would. More athletic Luka Doncic. So that's like the micro version of it, right? Superstars can play in any era. Macro version, the league shifts in the way that the game is played, right? So I do agree that there are guys who necessarily right now playing in the NBA don't have the skill set that they would need to thrive in like the 80s and 90s. But the game is so different that's the way these guys were brought up. You know what I'm saying? So if basketball was still the physical hand check, get to the rim, back to the basket type stuff, your Elton Brands backing down and having a post game, then the guys that we see coming into the league today, like Derek Lively Jr. he'd be a freak athlete playing in the 90s. You know what I mean? Yeah. But he's now a freak athlete playing in the 2000s or in the 2020s. So like, he just catches lobs.
Yeah.
Whereas that wouldn't be the case if you were playing 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that I think you're correct. The skill sets required to play in the NBA today are not the same as they were 25, 30 years ago, but that's because the game of basketball has evolved, not necessarily the players are less skilled than they were, because I think players today are probably more skilled than they were just due to advances in technology and training and stuff like that, right?
Science and yeah.
Exactly. So I don't disagree with the premise of what you're saying. I just think it's the shift has been made because the actual game of basketball has changed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, and my dad mentions like we don't see a lot of there's no back to the basket players anymore. Like I thought Embiid was going to kind of be that for a little while, and now he's kind of fallen in love with the three ball, and he'll take you off the dribble because he's a very, very skilled big man in terms of being able to handle the ball, unlike a lot of other big men that you would anticipate. Him and like Vic, and like they're a different breed nowadays. As you said, the game has changed. Big men are asked to do different things. It is a lot of like, I'm going to shoot a three or I'm going to pass a lob, and guys like the Derek Lively. Even, we had Gafford for a while, but he's playing with Lively out in Dallas now. Like guys like that, they are, there's a place for them in this game much more than there would have been in like the 80s, 90s era, even the early 2000s era, because you had kind of heliocentric ball with guys like KG and Iverson and Kobe Bryant, etc., where like it was a lot of take it off the dribble. Guys are going to rebound and everyone else is going to play defense, right? It was a lot of that back then. So yeah, it's a lot of lobs as opposed to guys making their way to the key and driving the rim and finishing at the rim. You mentioned Edwards doesn't do it a lot anymore. John Morant, even he doesn't do it with the ferocity that we saw early in his career. So
even so, like we can go even more macro to a one career where the game changed completely. Brook Lopez.
Yeah.
Brook Lopez was drafted and played with Brooklyn as a back-to-the-back center.
He was Rudy Gobert early in his career.
Yeah, back to the basket guy, very skilled footwork, could score in the paint. Yep. And now he shoots 28 footers.
Yep.
Like it's just changed that much in 15 years.
Yep, for sure. I want to pass it your way. Give me something else that you think might be a factor here in the ratings being down.
Sure. So I talked about how football is the most watchable sport on television, right? And a lot of that has to do with I like a lot of the television crews, like the booths we have calling these games, but a lot of it like has to do with them because there's so much time to fill in between all these plays. I'm someone that I watch a lot of sports without the audio, just so I can watch the actual game itself. I like have something else going on in the background. But that's why football lends itself to be so watchable on television as opposed to basketball, where, and I'll fully admit to this, my attention span is not what it used to be, right? Like just the entire world's attention span is collapsing.
Oh yeah.
By the year, right? You're watching everything in 30-second clips.
TikTok era.
Exactly, right? And I'm not even a TikTok guy. It's just like I spend a lot of time on Twitter, so sue me. But
140 characters at a time.
Yeah, basically. And that's what the NBA has become, right? And the NBA is a league that you can follow very, very closely without watching a single minute of basketball all season long.
Yeah.
You got guys, I'll throw us in the loop, right? You got Bill Simmons, you got Ryan Russillo, you got us, you got the Hoop Collective, you got Woj or you used to, I don't know, but Brian Windhorst, all these guys, they all have podcasts now, right? So you're driving into work, you're working from home, you're doing whatever. All you can do, or not all you can do, but what you can do is you can listen to people talk about the game of basketball who know what they're talking about. None of these guys don't know what they're talking about. They're all tuned in and plugged in, but you can not watch a minute of basketball and you can make like educated guesses, or you can make predictions about these games because of what you heard other people say, and you don't have to see a second of the on the court action, right? And that's something like that's not the NBA's fault. That's just how society works at this point in time. We have so much access to information and clips and talking heads and stuff like that like you don't have to consume the actual product to be a fan of the product. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Now, that doesn't apply to a lot of folks. Like, I know that you watch games and I watch games and I know Ryan watches games, but that's because
we don't have to.
We don't have to, right? But like I'll speak for myself here and you can say otherwise if you want, but like I am a fan of the game of basketball. It just so happens the NBA has the highest level of competition.
Yeah.
So I'm not out here like caping for the NBA, or even at this point, like I'm not even caping for the Wizards. Like I like the Wizards because they're the local team, but like they haven't given me anything to watch in a decade. So like I'm watching because I love the game of basketball and I want to see the most advanced players play at the highest level. I also love college basketball. I can
Yeah.
sit here and do an hour-long talk or an hour-long pod talking about college basketball. Like I just sweated out fucking Florida minus 3.5 versus North Carolina the other night, and it was fantastic. That game was incredible.
Yeah.
But like that's because I'm a basketball fan, and it just so happens that I watch the NBA and love the sport that they play, but I don't have to watch the NBA to be completely tuned in to what is happening around the league.
Yeah, for sure. I'll get to this real quick. I got a buddy, Andy, who I talk a lot of basketball with him. He and I talk a lot about this in terms of like, it's not the same impact. So in the NFL, you've got like 110 plays in an NFL game, right? And in any given game, you've got a handful of opportunities where the game can really swing in terms of momentum. Whether it's like you get a third down stop, but here comes like an illegal contact flag, pass interference can be a 50-yard penalty sometimes, that sort of thing. The impact that NFL refs can have as opposed to NBA referees is very, very different, with some exceptions, right? There's nights where you feel the difference, and it always feels very obvious. There's like a lopsided free throw count, that sort of thing. So it's not like refs in the NBA don't get or don't feel like they can interfere in games. I think it's just that, like in the NFL, it feels like those calls can be much more impactful. I'm curious your thought. Any dissenting or differing, or any sort of other thoughts you have with regards to kind of how officiating with the NBA, because there's like 240 possessions in an NBA game, whereas in the NFL there's I said 115 to 150 plays in a game, but there's really only about 20, I think it's like 24 possessions we average in an NFL game. So I think there's just more opportunity for NFL calls, NFL refs to be more impactful, as opposed to like a foul call in the middle of the third quarter likely isn't going to impact the conclusion of an NBA game.
Yeah, certainly. I will say that the referees make a difference, but not necessarily on a game-to-game basis. It's more of the way the league is called, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can go back to last season. Last season, prior to the All-Star break, we were breaking scoring records left and right. Like we were taking overs every single night. I think Washington broke the over like the first 15 games in a row or something.
We made a lot of money early.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like hand over fist, because we're just taking overs, and everybody was scoring everything.
Yep.
Come All-Star break, you have the officials meeting with the Players Association and the head of officiating and the NBA front office and or the NBA league office. And then we come out of All-Star break and they're calling more fouls. The scoring is slowed down. Like you're seeing more hand check stuff being called. And so that wasn't like one referee crew making a difference on a single game, necessarily the way you see it in the NFL. Like if a crew calls a lot of pass interferences, stuff like that, that was more of like an NBA league-wide shift. So the refs they certainly play an outcome in these games, right? You talked about a huge free throw discrepancy one way or the other, but I think it's more of the league's front or the league's office, like dictating to the referees how they want the games to kind of flow, right? And then it's obviously up to the referee's discretion. There's out of bounds calls and stuff like that, like jump balls and perfect example, the end of that Houston Golden State game where they called the jump ball and then Houston made the free throws to go up forward. It was like, well, I mean, that's on the referee. That's a big call, but like that doesn't happen every single play, Yep. So yes and no, but I think it's more of a league decision whenever they want to step in and change the way games are being officiated.
Yeah, I like that. I like the way you put that. I've got one last thought, and I think this is maybe a little bit of a swerve, maybe a little off the beaten path, maybe against the grain a little bit in terms of why I think the NBA watchability might be down and why the ratings might be down. I think we talk a lot about kind of levels, right? There's like roster guys, there's roster filler guys, there's like your mid-level kind of essential guys, then there's stars, and then there's superstars, right? There's like a dozen guys that are in the superstar range. There's probably 25 guys that are in the star range, and then it's like everybody else is kind of tiered in terms of how you build a roster. I think that part of what's causing some of the issues with ratings and watchability with the NBA, in addition to the things we've already talked about, is that we don't have enough superstar power in the NBA right now. We have almost too much star power, so it's very much spread across the league. But we don't have a guy like a LeBron who's willing to be the face of the franchise, face of the league. Jordan, when he was in it, he was a guy who was he was out there. He's in commercials. Everybody wanted to be like Mike, and Kobe was that guy, very vocal, very much like this is how we should treat the game, those sorts of things. And LeBron's been that. He's carried that mantle during his career. We have superstars right now that are just like very quiet, very mundane. They're very kind of business like when it comes to how they handle like a Jason Tatum, right? Like he should be a guy that everybody loves because he's a guy that can score 30 points a night. He's a guy that just won a championship. Those sorts of things. You know, Nikola Jokic is the best player on the planet, and most of the time it sounds like he couldn't be bothered to care about the game of basketball. Giannis is a guy who's a superstar, who's maybe the best player on the planet, and he's very kind of withdrawn. And I know there's like the language and the culture barrier, and we get a lot of European infusion, and maybe it's some of the culture clash, and the guys that are superstars just aren't those guys that are willing to put themselves out there, that are willing to be vulnerable and exposed in the media. And I think that potentially is hurting because like there's not that guy that you can, if you're the casual fan, who are you going to rally around, buy the jersey, and be out there as a stan, right? Like who's the next guy that everybody's going to rally behind? And I thought, like you mentioned earlier, I thought maybe Anthony Edwards could be that guy because he had the great Olympics and whatnot. But like, I just don't know that he is flashy maybe enough, especially now that he's settling for a lot of 3-pointers. Maybe it's the style of the game that detracts a little bit from that flashiness, but I just think we don't have enough like superstar power. And when I say power, I mean a guy that's willing to go out and be the dude, right? The dude that's in front of the mic, talking for the league, talking for the players, being in all these commercials and just being the face of the NBA that everybody can kind of rally behind and build up. And everybody wants to tune in, right? When that guy plays, they're either tuning in because they want to watch him play or they want to watch the other team play against him, right? I just don't know that we have that guy right now.
Certainly, and it should be Anthony Edwards, right? He's the charismatic guy. He has everything that you just talked about. And he went to the NBA conference final or the Western Conference Finals last year, but now his team sucks. So it's tough for the NBA to really put that out there. And I think it's the lack of superstardom by attrition, right? Because the league has never been more talented than it currently is. We've never had as many good players spread out across the league as we have right now. But the problem is, if you look at the last 6 MVP races, it's 3 guys, and none of them are from America. Yeah. So the height of the LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant era is like all of these guys, we can point to it on the map where they're from. You know, Kevin Durant's from DC, Steph is from, I guess, North Carolina, and then LeBron obviously from Akron, right? So like those are all places that people know. Ask people where Cameroon is on the globe,
right?
You know what I'm saying? Like, ask people. A lot of people know where Greece is, but like, can they point it out? Like, do they know anything about Greek culture? Like, Ryan's not here; he can tell us everything about Greek culture. But like, and then Shea, Shea's from Canada. He's another guy that he's not from here. When the Nuggets won the NBA championship, Jokic. Does anyone know where Jokic is from?
Yeah.
And then the second best player on that team, Jamal Murray, also from Canada.
Yeah.
Right. So while the league has never been in a better place in terms of talent, it's the American superstar talent that is lacking as compared to that talent from across the world.
Yeah.
And this is something we talked about, I think, in the off season. We talked about like the amount of foreign, I'll call them foreign because they're playing in America, but the amount of foreign superstars we have here in America, right? And how the NBA is now pulling from different talent pools across the globe with these NBA academies. And this is, I don't think this is going away, right? Like this is just something that will continue to happen. And we're either going to get a super charismatic foreign player like Luka, Luka's super charismatic. He's hilarious for the people that like dive into Mavericks Twitter or like watch the actual local broadcasts and see the interactions and stuff like that. Like Luka has all of those things as well, but the NBA is not pushing Luka to be the face of the NBA because they're still hanging on to LeBron and Steph and to a lesser degree Kevin Durant. And then the one guy who's American, Jason Tatum, who just won a finals, like he's not that guy. He's reserved. Like that's just
yeah.
That's just who he is. Yeah, like no aura, zero aura in that guy.
Right.
Which like that's fine. It doesn't. I'm not criticizing the guy for it.
Yeah.
I like to think that that's how I would be as well if I were an NBA superstar. Like I wouldn't. Interaction is one thing, but like being the face of the league, that's not something that I don't want to think that I would desire that. You know what I mean?
It takes a mentality and a special person who's willing, like I said, to be and feel maybe vulnerable and exposed, right? Like you're gonna have cameras on you all the time. And to his credit, right? LeBron James for 22 years now in the NBA hasn't had like a scandal, right? Where like usually when you've got cameras on you all the time, you usually end up in a situation where it's not good. And that's why a lot of people don't want to accept that limelight, don't want to take the mantle. So I think you're 100% right. And guys like Jason Tatum, who could, because of the way they play the game, could be that guy.
Yeah.
He wants to hang out with his kid and be a family man. And he wants to play basketball, but he wants to kind of like get away from basketball when he's done playing basketball. Not a great interview. Like he doesn't have that kind of personality. And Jokic, like he just wants to go fucking race horses with chariots. Like that's all he wants to do when he's not killing everybody on the basketball court. So
yeah,
for sure. Any other items you wanted to highlight related to this topic?
Not really. I mean, I just they have to do something about the play style in the NBA. Like it's gotta. Something has to be done about it. I'm not a very smart person, so I don't have the answer. Ryan said dunks are worth 3. Adopt. I do agree with this one. Adopt the European rules for goaltending. Yeah. Let the big men get down there and just kind of tap the ball back in. Scoring will go up. NBA loves scoring.
Yeah.
And it makes big men more viable banging in the paint.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I've heard the idea floated about a 4-point play or a 4-point shot, right?
Nah.
Okay. I'm glad you're shaking your head because I think that would be the worst possible fucking scenario. I don't care how far you make it from the hoop. Guys are only going to shoot from there, just like they only shoot from 3 nowadays. That is by far the worst idea I think you could have to try to make this game more exciting. I just don't see it. I've heard a lot of ideas floated about like making the court kind of interactive, and like putting some things out. I'm not sure I would get on with that either because I think the courts that they've put together for the cup detract enough from it already. Like I don't want to see things flashing like that. One guy was like, they should make it look like a pinball machine, and I'm like, I don't fucking want that in a basketball game. So there's some ideas getting floated around that are way out there, but a 4-point play especially, like don't do that. Don't do that. We'll never have anybody near the hoop. If you put it at 35 feet, that's where the game's going to be played. It's going to be played 10 feet from the half court line in either direction, and nobody's going to play anywhere else.
The very, very old man inside of me is screaming at the thought of changing the court.
Yeah.
Between the painted lines on the hardwood is a sacred place to me. As I'm sure it is to many people. Countless hours spent on the hardwood as a child. Do not, please, for the love of God, do not. If you want to expand the paint, maybe, as someone who did not play a lot of, paint basketball.
You and me both.
Sure, I guess. But like,
I was never a back to the basket guy.
Yeah. I think what is the most upsetting? One of the most upsetting. This might just be a me thing with the way that basketball is played now and the evolution of the sport is that your Lou Williams and your Jamal Crawfords are not in the NBA today. They have been removed from rosters in place of guys who just can shoot a lot of threes and play some defense.
Yep.
Your flamethrowers off the bench just don't really. It's not really a thing anymore. It's kind of a bummer, honestly, because those are some of the best characters we had in the league, right?
Oh,
like,
sure.
just it's like, oh man, Jamal Crawford's checking in midway through the first quarter.
Yep.
Buckle up, like it feels like. And Kevin Durant's one of these guys. I actually had this conversation today. Kevin Durant's just a pure hooper, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like basketball, specifically the NBA. You see it a lot in college, but like specifically the NBA has kind of done away with the hoopers.
Yeah.
Right. Like we just want shooters now instead of just guys that just love and grind basketball.
Yep.
And I get it. It's analytics. It's the most efficient thing you could do. But it's not the game that I love. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I wouldn't mind hand checks coming back into the game, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't mind if we allowed defenders to really get in your shorts.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think that would change a lot of things, potentially, and make the game a little bit more fluid, a lot more movement instead of guys just standing around the 3-point line waiting for their defender to cheat and just get a shot off. I think you could allow some of that again.
The Splash Brothers might have never been a thing if they would just allow Zaza Pachulia to defend the shot and land in your landing zone as a shooter. Like Kawhi Leonard never would have been able to take that corner three and have Zaza land in his spot and then fuck up his foot.
Yep.
Who knows what would have happened because Kawhi never would have shot that shot.
The dynasty started in the corner with Zaza Pachulia's foot.
Yep,
for sure.
Yep,
for sure. All right. Well, hey, it's Thursday night. We got an NFL game tonight, and as is typically tradition when we remember to do it, let's make a pick in tonight's game. We've got Denver and we've got the Chargers. Denver's playing at LA. LA's got the ball to start the game. We're just getting underway. The Chargers were a 3-point favorite at home. So for those out there that don't really pay attention to gambling, in the NFL, if you're a 3-point favorite at home, it's essentially a pick'em game because you get a field goal at home. Vegas, the Vegas line is typically you get a field goal at home. So Vegas sees this as a pretty close game. They expect the Chargers at home. They're a 3-point favorite. Who do you have in this game?
Me, Denver in a bounce back.
Okay.
Denver in a bounce back.
Okay. Yeah, they looked rough early in that game, especially against Indy last week. I'm gonna go the other way. I'm gonna go the Chargers also in a bounce back. They got run over by the Bucs last week.
Mm-hmm.
The Broncos against top 10 defenses this year are 0-4, and they've scored under 14 points in all of those games, I believe, or they're averaging 14 points. Whatever it is, it's 14 points. I think the Chargers can get to 20. So give me the Chargers by like a handful, maybe 5. I'll lay the 3 points, but it's going to be a sweat. I think it's going to be a tight game. Defense is going to be, they're kind of right now on the precipice of like backing into the playoffs if they do make it, only because the AFC is pretty bad this year at the bottom.
Yep.
NFC is really top heavy, as you and I know, because Washington is 9-5 and still needs 2 wins here down the stretch to really seal up a playoff spot.
Yep.
Imagine winning 10 games and not making the playoffs would be brutal, but it's a real possibility in the NFC. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, Bentley's got Denver. I've got the Chargers tonight.
Another big matchup tonight. Another big matchup tonight.
Yep.
We get South Carolina Ole Miss tonight. I'm hearing Vegas says South Carolina laying 8. What do you think?
Ooh. Yeah. All right. I like what South Carolina's done so far this year. I'll lay the points. I'll take the home team here.
Betting against yourself. I like that.
Yeah.
I was talking about our
matchup. I thought you were talking basketball. South Carolina's they've been all right to start the season basketball wise.
They did just beat Clemson, so
I haven't looked.
Not a big deal.
Yeah, right. I haven't looked at the schedule of college basketball, so that's on me. I thought you were talking college basketball. I'm coming for you. We'll create some controversy here on the show. I'm coming for you.
Well, you already came
I
from
need
my
my
recruits.
offensive line to fucking man up, though. That's been my problem all year. Offensive line's been terrible. If that front four for South Carolina gets into the backfield, I'm in big trouble.
One college basketball note, real quickly, going into the games on Tuesday. Tuesday. There were a bunch of games Tuesday, so the stat is a little old. The SEC was 50-4 on the season in the month of December.
Jesus.
Yeah. 50-4 as a conference in the month of December.
That's an impressive start to the month. Holy,
they're so good. So good.
It's a deep league this year in basketball, and usually everyone talks about it as a football conference, but deep league in basketball. So it's gonna be exciting as football winds down here and we start to get into the heart of the college and NBA basketball seasons. It's gonna be some interesting stuff. Conference play starts what? After Christmas?
Yeah, I think after New Year's conference play starts. Okay. I think.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that time frame.
Yeah, I should have known better that they weren't playing basketball tonight because they're not even in conference play yet.
Yeah. But, let's see. Conference play. Oh, Duke's first conference game. Yeah, December 21st. So.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, Saturday night conference play starts. Huh? I thought it was later. Yeah, we get right into conference play.
I thought it was after winter break. But... All right. Well, for Bentley and Ryan who couldn't be here, this has been Backyard Buckets, brought to you by Backyard Sports. Appreciate everybody in the comments section, Dad, SJ, everybody else who's out there viewing. We see those numbers. Appreciate y'all supporting. We'll see you again next week. We are